You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. I was awake because Fritz was awake. And when Fritz is awake before the sun, it means either the plumbing has revolted or civilization is about to be tested. The brownstone was still in its nightclothes, radiators murmuring, curtains drawn, the front hall dim and solemn with that polished wood smell that makes you behave, even when you don't intend to. Somewhere upstairs, the orchids were enjoying their private tropical climate, indifferent to the fact that the rest of New York was shivering. I was padding toward the kitchen in search of coffee when Fritz appeared at the foot of the stairs, like a man stepping onto a stage. "Archie," he said softly. "There is paper." That was all he had to say. Fritz has served in households where paper could mean a bill, a letter, an invitation, or a death sentence, and he gives each the same respectful tone. "Where?" I asked. He pointed, and I saw it, a rectangle of white lying on the tile near the front door, as neat as if it had been measured into place. The lock showed no damage. The chain was still in its bracket. No one had rung the bell. The paper had simply appeared, slipped under the door during the dead hour when even the city's worst habits yawn. He picked it up. It was thick, good stock. Whoever had chosen it liked their cruelty to look respectable. The handwriting was printed in block letters. Careful, and even we have him. $50,000 cash by noon. No police, no heroes. You will not name him. If you do, you will bury him. The last line was underlined, twice, with the kind of emphasis you see from men who know exactly how much fear costs. I read it again, because when something drops into your hand before sunrise, you always hope you misread it. I hadn't. Fritz was watching my face. "It is not a joke." "It's a joke," I said, "but not the kind that ends with laughter." Fritz's eyes flicked toward Wolfe's office door, closed beyond the hall. "Mr. Wolfe is awake." That made sense. Wolfe wakes early by schedule, like an emperor consulting his empire's timetable. But he doesn't come downstairs early. He lets the house come to him. The fact that Fritz knew he was awake meant Wolfe had rung the bell. Quietly, of course, and asked for something. "Did he ring for you?" I asked. "Yes," Fritz said. "For tea and for the newspaper. And now he's going to get ransom notes," I said. "It's a busy morning." I went into the office without knocking, because habit is a powerful thing, and Wolfe doesn't encourage knocking. He sat behind his desk as if he'd been welded there years ago. Shoulders broad, face composed, eyes half, lidded in that way that suggests he is bored with you, even before you speak. The morning light behind the curtains was still grey. Wolfe's desk lamp made a warm pool on the blotter. The room smelled faintly of cigar tobacco and leather and whatever expensive soap Fritz uses on the furniture to keep it from becoming common. Wolfe looked at the paper in my hand. "Bring it," he said. I brought it and laid it on the blotter. Wolfe read it once, no drama, no pause, and when he finished, he did not curse, which was his method of telling you that cursing would be a waste of breath. He looked up at me. "You are up early." "I wanted to catch the sunrise," I said. "It's shy this time of year." Wolfe ignored that. "This is not a child's prank." "No," I agreed. "Too much stationery." Wolfe's eyes returned to the note, $50,000. "Cash," I said. "By noon, and we're not allowed to name him." Wolfe's eyelids lowered further. An absurd instruction. "Maybe," I said. "But it's underlined like an insurance policy." Wolfe's gaze lifted again, and now there was something in it that made the room feel smaller. Irritation, certainly, but beneath it a restrained alertness I rarely saw, except when an orchid shipment had been delayed, or when someone tried to move him off his schedule. He said, "You will not speak his name." I blinked. His name. Wolfe did not answer immediately. He picked up his pencil, rolled it once between his fingers, then set it down with unnecessary precision. "Archie," he said, "do you understand the significance of that line?" "You mean the part about burying him," I said. I understand the significance of burial in general. Wolfe's nostrils flared faintly. The line is not a threat of violence, it is a threat of exposure. I stared at him. Exposure of what? Wolfe's eyes held mine, and his silence was suddenly loud. In all the years I had lived under his roof and watched him knock men's reputations over like ninepins, there were very few times Wolfe refused a name. Wolfe loves names. He collects them the way some men collect stamps. A name to him is a handle on truth. For him to refuse a name meant the handle burned. "Who is it?" I demanded. Wolfe's jaw tightened. Number, that was not Wolfe being mysterious for sport. That was Wolfe being cornered. I leaned forward, planted my palms on the edge of his desk, and lowered my voice. "Boss, you can't ask me to play a game when you won't tell me what peace I'm supposed to protect." Wolfe's eyes hardened. "I can, and I do." "That's charming," I said. "It's also suicidal." Wolfe said, very calmly, "You will obtain the money." I stared. "You mean you plan to pay it?" Wolfe's voice was flat. "The alternative is uncertain." "Everything is uncertain," I said. "That's why we have detectives." Wolfe's gaze did not waver. "This is not a matter for your rhetoric, Archie. It is a matter for efficiency. We have until noon." I felt the clock start ticking the moment. He said it out loud. Noon was not far. It was practically leaning over our shoulders. "All right," I said. "Let's pretend we're paying. Where do they want it delivered?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to the bottom of the note. There, in smaller print, was a second sheet tucked under the first. He lifted it, and the movement had the same reluctant precision as a man lifting something unpleasant with tongs. This one was simpler. Wait for the call at 10:30. Instructions will follow. No police. No names. I looked up. "They're calling here." Wolfe nodded once. "You know them," I said. Wolfe's silence was answer enough again. Fritz appeared at the office doorway without a sound. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "your tea." Wolfe inclined his head. "Thank you, Fritz." Fritz set the tray down and looked at the paper on the blotter. His expression did not change, but I saw the faint tightening around his eyes, the only sign Fritz ever gives that he has just seen something ugly and resents the intrusion. Wolfe lifted his cup. His hand was steady. Mine wasn't. I said, "Boss, I'm going to ask the obvious question." Wolfe sipped. "Do not." "I will anyway," I said. "Why won't you name him?" Wolfe set the cup down. The porcelain click was small and exact. "Because," Wolfe said, "the instruction is not arbitrary. It is aimed." "Aimed at you," I said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "And through me, at something I prefer not to expose." That was as close as Wolfe comes to admitting vulnerability. It made my stomach tighten more than the threat did. I straightened, forced my voice into its usual shape. "All right, we play their little noon game, 50,000 in cash. That's not pocket change, even for a man who buys orchids like other men buy socks." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not comment on my expenditures." "Fine," I said. "We need the money. We need it in cash. We need it by noon. And we need to do it without the police getting wind, assuming we're humorously pretending to follow instructions." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "We are not pretending." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes," Wolfe said, and in that single syllable was the weight of whatever name he refused to speak. I exhaled slowly. "Then I'll go to the bank." "You will go to the bank," Wolfe agreed, "and you will also speak to Mr. Cohen." Lon Cohen, the newspaperman, was a friend of Wolfe's, in the same way a crow is a friend of a scarecrow, close, watchful, and useful. "For what?" "For discretion," Wolfe said. "And for information. A crime of this sort has echoes. Mr. Cohen hears." "Echoes," I nodded. "And Panzer?" Wolfe's eyes shifted, and for the first time I saw something like calculation flicker. "Mr. Panzer will arrive shortly." "How do you know?" I asked. Wolfe's expression was almost smug. "Because I have summoned him." "Of course," I muttered. "We're collecting the usual cast." Fritz cleared his throat gently. "Archie." "What?" I asked. "The door," he said. I followed his gaze to the front hall. From the office you can see a slice of it through the open doorway. On the tile near the front door, where the ransom note had been, there was now another piece of paper. I blinked. "That's impossible." Fritz's voice stayed calm. "It is there." I moved fast, faster than Wolfe likes me to move in his house, and scooped it up. This one was smaller, folded once, no envelope. Inside, in the same careful block print, "We are watching you read." I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. I carried it back to Wolfe. There nearby. Wolfe read it, and gave a small sound of contempt. "Naturally." "You're taking this too calmly," I said. Wolfe's eyes lifted to mine. "Archie, do not confuse calm with indifference." I opened my mouth to argue, and shut it again, because I could hear something in his tone now, not panic, not fear, but pressure, contained and growing. Wolfe was a proud man. He hated threats. He hated being maneuvered. For him to accept a ransom demand meant the hostage was not merely valuable. He was necessary. He took one glance at my expression and knew he'd arrived in time for unpleasantness. "Morning," I said. "We're having a holiday special extortion with breakfast." His eyes flicked to Wolfe's office. "Wolfe, in there," I said, "and he's in a mood." He went in. I followed, because if this visitor was going to hear the name Wolfe wouldn't speak, I wanted to hear it too. The man stood before the desk, hands at his sides, gaze steady. "You called." Wolfe nodded once. "Yes, we have received a demand." His eyes went to the ransom note. He read it without moving his head. When he reached the line about not naming the hostage, the slightest change touched his face. So slight, you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. Recognition. Too quick, too practiced. Wolfe watched him. "You understand." Saul's voice was quiet. "Yes." I looked from one to the other. "I don't." Wolfe's jaw set. "You will," Saul said. "They're not bluffing." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Explain." He looked at me then, just once, and in that look was something like reluctant sympathy, as if he pitied me for being the one without the missing piece. He said to Wolfe, "They wrote it the way it has to be written when the hostage's name is the weapon." Wolfe's fingers pressed together. "Yes." I felt my patience snap. "All right, that's enough poetry. Boss, either you tell me who this man is or I'm going to start guessing out loud. And I promise I'll guess in the most inconvenient direction." Wolfe's eyes held mine, and for a moment I thought he would refuse me again. Then he spoke, slowly, as if each word cost him. "You will not say the name in this house," Wolfe said, "but you will know it." He paused, and in that pause the ticking clock in my head got louder. Then Wolfe said, "The man they hold is Saul Panzer. Chapter 2, the name he won't say for a full second after Wolfe spoke. The office went perfectly still. The kind of still that isn't quiet, it's waiting. Then the doorbell rang again. Not the front bell this time. The office bell, Wolfe's private wire for Fritz. And Fritz's tread in the hall had a briskness I didn't like. I glanced at Saul Panzer, who stood by the desk with his hat level and his face set like a lock, and the glance was automatic. Because when trouble enters our house, it usually comes with Saul somewhere in the frame. Wolfe didn't move. He simply lifted his eyes, and his voice turned to ice. "Mr. Panzer," he said, "remove your hat." Saul's hand rose slowly, and for the first time since he'd come in, I saw a hesitation. It was tiny. It was also not Saul. Saul doesn't hesitate over a hat. A hat is cloth. Decisions are steel. The man's fingers touched the brim, paused, and the brim tilted enough for the lamplight to strike his face properly. It wasn't Saul Panzer. It was close enough to fool a casual eye in a dim hall, similar build. Same dark coat, the hat pulled low, the posture disciplined. But close enough is what con men live on, and I am paid to kill close enough. The jawline was wrong. Saul's is clean and certain. This one had a faint softness at the chin, like a man who still ate sweets. The eyes were worse. Saul's eyes are flat, as if he has filed the world into categories, and refuses to be surprised. These eyes flicked. They searched. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. "You are not Saul Panzer." The imposter's hand dropped from the brim. For a heartbeat, he looked as though he might try charm. Then he decided charm was too slow. He moved. He lunged for the desk, not at Wolfe. Nobody lunges at Wolfe, unless they're insane. But at the ransom note on the blotter, his fingers almost reached it. Almost. I caught his wrist and twisted. I didn't use fancy technique. I used gravity and annoyance. His shoulder dipped, his knees buckled, and he made a small sound that was pure panic. "Archie," Wolfe said mildly, "do not damage him. He may be useful." "I'll try to keep his usefulness intact," I said, tightening just enough to make him understand that his bones were negotiable. He hissed, "Let go." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Speak. Who sent you?" The imposter's mouth worked. His gaze darted to the door. "Don't," I said. "That door leads to Fritz, and Fritz is more ruthless than he looks." It was true. Fritz's ruthlessness is civilized, which makes it more frightening. Wolfe said, "Archie, search him." I patted the man down. No gun, a thin knife in an ankle sheath. Cheap, a folded paper in his inside pocket. Crisp, clean, and already prepared. I took it out and unfolded it on Wolfe's desk. "Wait for the call at 10:30. Instructions will follow. No police. No names. If you trick us, we end him." Wolfe read it, and his eyelids lowered. "Now," Wolfe said to the imposter, "you will tell us where Saul Panzer is." The man's face changed. His panic hardened into something like stubbornness. "I don't know," he said quickly. Wolfe's voice was quiet. "That is improbable." The imposter swallowed. "I was paid to bring the note." "That's all. Paid by whom?" Wolfe pressed. The man's lips tightened. He tried silence. I increased the twist on his wrist by one small degree. He yelped. Wolfe looked faintly displeased. "Archie." "I'm not damaging him," I said. "I'm educating him." The imposter gasped. "A man, no name." He met me near the subway. Gave me $50. Told me to wear this coat and hat and walk in like I belonged, like Saul. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Why?" Because they said Wolfe would hesitate if Saul was here." He blurted. "They said if Saul was in the room, Wolfe would do something clever. If Saul was gone, Wolfe would do what he was told." The words landed hard because they were true enough to hurt. "Saul Panzer missing since a late job on 35th Street. The phrase formed itself in my head like a headline. Saul had stepped into our house 1,000 times without ceremony. The idea of him being gone made the brownstone feel suddenly less solid. Wolfe's face was rigid, but I saw the smallest shift in his breathing. Wolfe does not show fear. He shows offense, and this was someone handling his household like a prop, and removing a man Wolfe relied on, as if removing a chair. Wolfe said, "When did you last see Saul Panzer?" "I never saw him," the imposter insisted. "I swear." Wolfe studied him, then nodded once. "Archie, release him." I blinked. "Boss, release him," Wolfe repeated. "He is a courier. Couriers are replaceable." I let go. The imposter staggered back, clutching his wrist, eyes wild. Wolfe's voice stayed cold. "You will leave this house. You will go where you were instructed to go after delivering that note. You will report that you were not detained." The imposter stared, confused. "What?" "You will do it," Wolfe said. "If you do not, you will discover how unpleasant Inspector Kramer can be when he is bored." That name jolted the man. He nodded too fast. "All right, all right." "Fritz," Wolfe called. Fritz appeared instantly, expression composed as always. He took one look at the imposter and the angle of my shoulders and understood everything without being told. "Show this man out," Wolfe said, "and then lock the door." "Yes, sir," Fritz replied. The imposter hurried out as if the hall itself might bite him. Fritz escorted him with perfect manners, which made it worse. When the front door closed, I heard the bolt slide home. Clean. Final. I turned back to Wolfe. "Saul's missing." Wolfe lifted his eyes to mine. "Yes." And you didn't tell me because time is short, Wolfe cut in, and because your mouth is not a safe. That stung, but it was also fair. I can keep a secret. I just complain while I do it. They said, how do you know it's Saul? Wolfe's mouth tightened. Because Saul did not come home last night. That happens, I protested. He has jobs, late ones. Not without notifying me, Wolfe said. Not without notifying you, and not with a ransom note under my door before dawn. I sat down hard in the red leather chair. It felt suddenly too empty without Saul standing nearby, making silence look competent. You've already tried calling him? I asked. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes. There was no answer. At 6:30 his answering service received a message, typed, not spoken, stating that any attempt to involve the police would result in his death. Typed, I repeated. So they want no voice, no trace. They want obedience, Wolfe said. The phone rang. Fritz answered in the hall. I listened to his murmured response, then his step to the office door. It is Inspector Kramer, Fritz said. Wolfe did not move. Tell him I am engaged. Fritz hesitated, rare for him. He says it concerns Saul Panzer. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Give it here. He took the receiver, listened, and for a moment Wolfe's face went completely still. Then he said, Yes, Inspector, come at once. Use the back entrance. Do not bring anyone. He hung up. I stared. You're pulling Kramer into it. Quietly, Wolfe said. I intend to keep him in the shadows until he is useful. That's Wolfe. He treats a police inspector like a piece of furniture. Sometimes he even polishes him. Kramer arrived. 10 minutes later, coat open, hat crooked, face red with the kind of anger that comes from being summoned privately. He pushed into the office and barked. What the hell is this about Saul? Wolfe looked at him blandly. Good morning, Inspector. Kramer's eyes went to me. Don't good morning me. Saul Panzer didn't show for a court appearance this morning. Saul Panzer doesn't miss court. Not unless he's kidnapped, I said. Yes, Kramer froze. The word hit him like a fist. What? Wolfe slid the ransom note across the desk toward him. Kramer snatched it, read it, and when he finished his face had gone a shade that didn't match any of his usual colors. They took Saul, he said hoarsely. For you. Wolfe's tone was quiet. For my obedience. Kramer slammed his fist on the desk. I'll put every man I've got on it. You will do nothing, Wolfe said, and the calm in his voice made Kramer's fury look childish. Not yet. Kramer gaped. Not yet. A man's been grabbed off your damn street. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And the kidnappers have anticipated your noise. They have written, no police, because they expect you to behave like a bull. Kramer's face flushed deeper. You calling me? Yes, Wolfe said. Now sit down. For a second, I thought. Kramer would explode. Then he did something rare. He obeyed. He dropped into a chair, breathing hard, eyes fixed on Wolfe. Wolfe continued. At 10:30, there will be a call. At 11:30, there will be a delivery instruction, and at noon there will be either a payment or a corpse. Kramer's jaw worked. We trace the call. No, Wolfe said. Kramer stared. No, that's the first thing we do. Wolfe's eyes remained steady. If you trace the call, Saul dies. That is not speculation. It is written into the design. Kramer looked at me then, and in his eyes was something I had seen only a handful of times, fear that couldn't be bullied away. Wolfe, Kramer said, voice lower. They're not selling Saul. They're buying you. Wolfe nodded once. Precisely. The phone rang again, this time Wolfe's private line. Fritz brought it in without speaking and set it on the desk as if it were a live insect. Wolfe lifted the receiver. Yes, a pause. Wolfe listened, eyes half-lidded, giving nothing away. Then he said, understood. He hung up and looked at me. A second note has been delivered. Fritz held it out. This one was smaller, folded once, again in careful block print, Goodwin alone. 11:30, phone booth, Broadway and 48th. Bring the cash. If you bring anyone, he dies. Kramer lurched up. Number no way. We put a tail. Wolfe's voice cut. Inspector, be silent. Kramer's hands clenched. They'll kill him. They will kill him if you blunder, Wolfe said. That is why you are here privately, to prevent your blundering from becoming fatal. I stared at the note Broadway and 48th at 11:30, a phone booth. In Manhattan at midday, a booth is practically a confession. It's public enough to hide and cramped enough to trap. I said, they want me alone. Wolfe's eyes held mine. They want you controllable. Flattering, I muttered. What do we do? Wolfe's mouth tightened. We agree. Kramer exploded. You agree. You're going to send Archie with 50 grand into a phone booth like bait, I supplied. Wolfe nodded. Yes. Kramer glared. I won't allow it. Wolfe's gaze was cold. You will allow it because you have no authority in my home. Kramer's face twisted. This is my city. And this is my house, Wolfe replied. In my house, Inspector, you are a witness, not a commander. I leaned forward. Boss, you're going to do something quiet, while I do something loud, right? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I will do something correct. That was as much reassurance as I was going to get. Kramer said tight. If anything happens to Saul. Wolfe looked at him. If anything happens to Saul, Inspector, you will have the luxury of blaming me. I will not have that luxury. Now listen. He laid it out. The way Wolfe lays out dinner, orderly, precise, with no patience for preferences. Publicly we would comply. I would withdraw the cash. I would go alone to the booth at 11:30. No police, no tails. Privately, Wolfe would do what he always did, shift the board without appearing to move a piece. He would keep Kramer close, quiet and useful. He would position men where they could watch without being seen, and he would prepare. In his mind, the only thing Wolfe trusts completely, the logic of a trap. When Wolfe finished, Kramer sat back, breathing hard, staring at the note as if willing it to turn into something else. I stood up and folded the paper carefully. My stomach had settled into that cold, steady feeling it gets when the clock starts running and the room stops being safe. I said, all right, 11:30, Broadway and 48th. I'll bring the cash, I'll bring my charm, I'll bring my last will and testament. Wolfe's eyes held mine. Bring your intelligence. Do you have any spare? I asked. Wolfe ignored that. Archie, when you enter the booth, do not speak Saul's name. I stared at him. Why? Wolfe's face went rigid again. The same rigidity as in the dawn light when he refused the name. Because, Wolfe said softly, they are not merely listening, they are recording, and the name is the lever. Kramer's voice cracked. What name? Wolfe looked at him, and for the first time I saw something like open contempt. You will learn it, Wolfe said, when it becomes necessary, not before. Kramer clenched his fists. But he didn't argue. Fear does that to a man. It teaches him when noise is useless. I went to the door. Fritz was there, composed, but his eyes followed me with a worry he wouldn't admit. Coffee? Fritz asked quietly. At this point, I said, I need something stronger than coffee and less illegal than courage. Fritz's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then perhaps eggs, I said. Perfect. If I'm going to get trapped in a phone booth, I might as well do it on a full stomach. As I headed for the kitchen, the house felt suddenly different. Same polished wood, same quiet, same warm air, but the silence had teeth now. And upstairs, the orchids bloomed on schedule, as if the world had no ransom notes at all. Chapter 3, Broadway at 11:30 by 11 o'clock. I had $50,000 in a plain brown envelope that looked as innocent as a grocery bill and felt about as safe as a rattlesnake. I'd gone to the bank with the kind of smile that makes clerks nervous, signed things I didn't read, and walked out with enough cash to turn an honest man dishonest on the spot. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had not offered advice. He had offered instructions, which is his idea of generosity. Do not speak Saul's name. he had said again, as if my tongue were a loose dog. Do not improvise, observe. That last word was Wolfe's prayer. Kramer had glowered at me as if I were personally responsible for the existence of kidnappers. He wanted to drape the city in detectives like tinsel and shake it until Saul fell out. Wolfe kept him quiet by sheer will, which is one of Wolfe's least advertised talents. I left at 11:15 alone, because the note said alone, and because if you bring a tale to a man who expects one, you might as well bring a brass band. I walked instead of taking a cab in Midtown at midday. A cab is slower than feet and more noticeable than a man who looks like he belongs to the crowd. Midtown in the late morning is not romantic. It's a mouth, open, hungry, full of noise. Trucks wheeze at the curb. Men hurry with briefcases. Women cut through the tide with shopping bags and sharp elbows. Somebody is always calling somebody else a name that isn't kind. The city doesn't swallow you whole, it chews. I reached Broadway and 48th at 11:20, 6, and immediately knew why they had picked it. It was crowded enough for perfect cover and chaotic enough to keep anyone from seeing patterns unless they were paid to. The phone booth stood near the corner like a glass confession box, scratched and smudged and utterly exposed. The receiver inside looked as if it had heard every lie in New York and was tired of them. I checked my watch. 11:20, 9. I took a breath, stepped into the booth, and shut the door. The city's roar dulled into a muffled hum, like listening through a pillow. My reflection looked back at me in the glass. Archie Goodwin, professional nuisance, holding $50,000 and trying to appear as if he did this for sport. The phone rang at exactly 11:30. I picked up. Hello. A voice came on, disguised, no doubt. It was thickened somehow, flattened, as if the speaker had stuffed cotton in his mouth and insult in his soul. Goodwin. I didn't ask how he knew. Yes. Listen, do not speak his name. Wolfe's warning clicked in my head like a lock. Fine, I won't sing. A pause. Then, you have the money. Yes. Open the envelope. Count it. I blinked. Right here. In a phone booth. What am I? A magician. Count it. I did. Not because it made sense, but because refusing was a hobby for other people. I flipped the flap, fanned the bills, and counted in tens, my thumb moving fast. The booth smelled of old tobacco and cheap soap. My own sweat added a note of urgency. 50,000, I said. Good, the voice replied. Now listen carefully. You will leave the booth. You will walk east 3 blocks. You will stop at a newsstand and buy the Herald. The Herald, I repeated. That's your big plan. You will buy it, the voice said, as if I were slow, and you will read the front page headline. Under the headline there will be a small mark. A circle. You will turn to the classified ads. You will find the same mark beside an advertisement. It will give you the next location and time. I stared at the receiver. You're making me do a scavenger hunt. It is not a hunt, the voice said. It is a test. A test of what? I asked. Before I could stop myself, there was a pause, and I could almost hear the smile on the other end, cold and pleased. Obedience. I tightened my grip on the receiver until my knuckles went pale. You know, I said, you could have been a schoolteacher. I am teaching you, the voice replied. Now, do not attempt to signal anyone. Do not speak to strangers. Do not deviate. If you do, we end him. Sure, I said, and if I do everything right, you hand him back with a bow on his head. Silence. Then, move. The line went dead. I hung up and stood there a second, letting the booth's cramped air press on me. This wasn't a ransom drop. It was choreography. They weren't selling a man. They were buying Wolfe's obedience and using me as the marionette to prove the string was tight. I stepped out of the booth, and the city noise slammed into me again, bright and indifferent. I kept my face calm because a calm face is camouflage. I walked east, 3 blocks into the crush, the money in my hand under my coat, my eyes working. Every man brushing past might have been watching. Every woman turning her head might have been a signal. Every street vendor's shout could have been cover for a whispered instruction. At the corner of 7th and 45th, a newsstand sat like a little island of paper and cigarettes. The vendor had a red nose and the bored look of a man who has seen every kind of customer and can't be impressed anymore. I leaned in. "Herald," I said. He shoved one out without looking. I paid, took it, and stepped aside, opening it the way a man opens a trapdoor. Carefully, ready to jump. The front page headline was something cheerful about holiday shopping. Under the second line of print, exactly as promised, was a tiny pencil circle. So small you could miss it if you weren't told to look. My stomach tightened. They had arranged this in advance. That meant either control of the newsstand supply or a plant. Either way, it meant they were closer than I liked. I flipped to the classifieds and scanned. It took me a moment. Then I found it, a little circle beside an ad that looked like nonsense. Wanted, experienced hand, reliable, quiet. Meet 12:15, West 35th service entrance. Ask for morning, West 35th. Our street. They were moving me like a piece on a board, and the board was my front yard. I folded the paper, tucked it under my arm, and kept walking as if I had simply bought a newspaper to see if the world still existed. Inside, the clock in my head was pounding. 12:15 service entrance, ask for morning. A neat little joke. Morning had started under Wolfe's door, and now it was waiting for me around the back of his house. And somewhere, in the city's roar and glitter and cold, Saul Panzer was alive or dead, depending on whether I walked the line the way they wanted. I headed west. Chapter 4. The dock with no trucks, West 35th, has more personalities than an actor with debts. The front of Wolfe's brownstone is respectable, brick, brass, and the kind of quiet that makes deliverymen lower their voices. The back is different. The back is where New York keeps its elbows. The classified ad had sent me to a service entrance, which sounded polite until you got there. What it meant in practice was a narrow lane behind a row of buildings, half shadow and half slush, smelling of wet cardboard and old diesel. It was called a loading dock because trucks occasionally visited it. But at 12:15 the dock had no trucks. It had me. I arrived a minute early and hated that I was early. Early gives the other man time to study you first. I kept moving, like I belonged there, like I had a delivery and a schedule. The newspaper folded under my arm was my excuse. The brown envelope under my coat was my temptation. A door to my left opened without drama, and a man stepped out. He wasn't big. He didn't need to be. He had a winter cap pulled low, and a scarf wrapped high, leaving only his eyes visible. Those eyes were sharp and flat and impatient. He looked like a man who had been told to do a job, and resented having to do it in cold weather. "Morning," he said. "That's what they told me to ask for," I replied. He nodded once, and his gaze flicked, quick, professional, to the door behind me, to the alley mouth, to the rooftop line. He wasn't alone. He was checking where his backup might need to work. "Give it," he said. "That's fast," I said. "I'm a romantic. I like to see the merchandise before I pay." His eyes didn't change. "You don't get to see him." "That's funny," I said, "because ransom notes usually include the hostage as part of the deal. Otherwise, it's just a donation." He took one step closer. "You talk too much. I'm paid by the syllable," I told him, and shifted my weight slightly, "because you don't let a man with flat eyes get within arm's reach without making plans." He gestured with his chin. "The envelope." I slid my hand inside my coat and pulled out the brown envelope. I held it up, not handing it over yet. "Here's the money," I said. "Now here's the part where you show me your hostage breathing." That name tasted dangerous in my mouth, and it felt wrong to let it out in the open air, but I said it anyway because I wanted to see the man's reaction. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. If Saul's name was supposed to be a weapon, this guy wasn't holding it. "No," he said. "You were told not to speak names." "I was told a lot of things," I said. "Some of them were smart." He moved, quick as a switchblade. His hand shot for the envelope, not to take it politely but to snatch it. That's always the giveaway. A man expecting payment will negotiate. A man expecting to steal will grab. I didn't let him have it. I jerked back, and his fingers caught only air and the edge of my coat. I swung my left hand up and shoved his wrist away, then drove my shoulder into his chest. We hit the brick wall hard. His breath came out in a grunt. He recovered faster than I liked, trained or desperate. "Idiot," he hissed, and his other hand came up with something glinting. A knife, small but sharp. That was new. The note had said no heroes. Nobody had said anything about no knives. I kicked his shin, hard, and he swore. The knife dipped. I grabbed his scarf and yanked, using the fabric like a leash, dragging him off balance. The envelope tore open. Bills fluttered out like pale leaves, spinning in the dirty air, landing in slush, sticking to wet concrete. For a split second, the alley looked as if it had started to snow money. The man's eyes widened, not with regret, but with fury. "You!" He lunged again, knife up, and I did the one thing you're not supposed to do with a man holding a blade. I closed distance. I grabbed his coat sleeve and rammed him against the wall again, pinning his knife arm high. My elbow drove into his ribs. He grunted, twisted, and the knife scraped my coat instead of my skin. He jerked free, stumbled back, and for the first time I saw real panic in his eyes. Not because of the fight, because of the spilled money. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was trouble. Trouble meant someone else would start asking questions. Trouble meant delay. He made a decision. He didn't try to stab me. He didn't try to gather the money. He turned and ran. Too fast. A man expecting payment doesn't run from payment. A man expecting trouble does. He sprinted toward the far end of the dock, where a white delivery van sat idling. No markings, no company name, just a blank shell with dirty snow on the roof. The side door slid open as he reached it, and a second figure inside grabbed his arm and yanked him in like luggage. The door slammed, the van lurched forward, and in that instant, my brain snapped into the only useful rhythm it has in emergencies. Do something now, explain it later. I ran after the van, not to catch it, no chance, but to touch it. As it swung past me, I slapped my palm against the rear panel and left something there. A small adhesive tracking tag Wolfe, kept for cases that required quiet persistence. I'd palmed it from my pocket the moment the knife appeared, because panic and preparation sometimes hold hands. The tag stuck. The van fishtailed slightly on slush, then shot out of the alley mouth and into traffic, disappearing as if it had never existed. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty lane, listening to the city as it swallowed the van whole. Then I looked down at the money. Bills lay everywhere, some plastered to wet concrete, some caught in a puddle, some fluttering weakly against a trash can. $50,000 turned into confetti. "Well," I muttered, "that's one way to ruin a holiday." I dropped to my knees and started scooping bills with both hands. There was no dignity in it, but there was necessity. A man could lose his pride and survive. He couldn't lose $50,000 and enjoy the conversation afterward. A door opened behind me. I spun, half expecting another knife. It was Fritz. He stood in the alley entrance, coat buttoned, face calm, as if he had stepped out to check the weather. Behind him, just visible in the hall shadow, was Kramer, held back by Wolfe's strict instruction not to blunder. Fritz took in the scattered money, my torn envelope, and my expression, and he did the remarkable thing Fritz always does. He made the chaos feel manageable by refusing to look surprised. "Archie," he said politely, "do you require assistance?" "Only in the form of 10 extra hands," I said, "and maybe a miracle." Fritz stepped forward and began picking up bills with the neat efficiency of a man gathering fallen napkins. He did not comment. Fritz knows that commentary is wasted in a crisis. Kramer couldn't help himself. He pushed into the alley and barked. "Where is he?" "Where's Saul?" "Not here," I snapped. And whoever that was didn't expect to negotiate. He expected to grab and go. Kramer's face went purple. "We should have had men. We should have had a choir," I said. But we didn't. I finished scooping up what I could, shoved the damp bills into the torn envelope, and stood. My hands were wet and filthy. My coat had a shallow cut. My pulse was still racing. Kramer glared down the alley mouth. "Which way gone?" I said. "But I tagged the van." Kramer blinked. "You, what?" I pulled out my phone and checked the app linked to the tag. A tiny dot blinked on the map, already moving north. "Tracking," I said. "Quiet tracking." Kramer looked like he wanted to argue with the concept of quiet, but the blinking dot did something rare. It shut him up. Back in Wolfe's office 5 minutes later, Wolfe listened to my report without a single wasted breath. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He looked at the cut in my coat and filed it under expenses. When I finished, knife, spilled money, van, tag, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you have confirmed my suspicion that I'm clumsy." I offered. "That the ransom is theater," Wolfe replied. "A performance designed to move you, to occupy you, to make you frantic." Kramer snapped. "Then, where's Saul?" Wolfe's gaze held him. "The kidnappers are not selling a man, they are purchasing my obedience. Your obedience as well. Inspector, though you have been too loud to notice." Kramer's jaw clenched. "Obedience to what?" Wolfe leaned back slightly, fingertips together. "To the real demand," he said, "which has not yet been spoken." I felt the clock tick again, louder. Wolfe looked at the torn envelope on his desk, damp bills peeking out like wounded birds. "They took nothing," Wolfe said softly. "They only proved they can command movement. The next instruction will not be about money." He lifted his eyes to mine. "It will be about the name." Chapter 5. Proof of life. Proof of need. The brownstone had that tight. Waiting quiet it gets when Wolfe is thinking, and the rest of us are trying not to breathe wrong. Fritz had put fresh coffee on the side table, and nobody touched it. Kramer paced twice, stopped, and then stood still, only because Wolfe's glare had the same effect on him as a leash. I was watching the little blinking dot on my phone, our tagged van, until it stopped being useful. It had wandered north, stalled near the river, and then vanished in a dead zone of concrete and steel. Either the tag had been found, or the van had been parked. Somewhere my signal couldn't reach. Either way, it had given us one thing, confirmation that the men running this were organized enough to plan and nervous enough to run. Wolfe was not nervous. Wolfe was offended. He sat behind his desk with the torn envelope of damp bills in front of him, like evidence of someone's bad manners. His hands were folded, his eyes were half-lidded. His face was the color of patience, stretched thin. At 1:28, the doorbell rang. Fritz went to answer it and returned, carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. There was no address, no stamp, no name, only a strip of masking tape holding it shut. Fritz set it on the blotter with the care he gives to anything that might contaminate the furniture. Wolfe looked at it as if it were an insect. "Open it," he said. I did. I peeled the tape, unfolded the paper, and found a strip of dark silk tie, navy with a subtle diagonal pattern I had seen 100 times under Saul Panzer's coat when he came in for a report or a check. The fabric was cut cleanly, as if with scissors, not torn. Along one edge, dried blood had stiffened it into a dark crust. Kramer lunged forward. "That's Saul's." Wolfe lifted a finger. "Inspector." Kramer stopped with his mouth open, then shut it like a man biting down on a swear. I held the strip up. "Proof," I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Proof of what?" "That he's alive," I said, and then immediately hated the word. "Alive," because I had no right to use it. Wolfe didn't look at the blood. He looked at the cut edge of the silk. "This is not proof of life," he said. "It is proof of injury, and it is proof of haste." "Haste?" I asked. "They are responding to our resistance," Wolfe said. "They expected compliance at the dock. They received disorder. Therefore they supply a token to restore discipline." Kramer's fists clenched. "We don't need tokens. We need Saul." Wolfe's gaze flicked to him, cold, then stopped behaving as if noise summons him. Kramer's face reddened, but he stayed quiet. That in itself told me he was scared enough to be trainable. Wolfe said, "Archie, take the tie strip." I did, careful not to smear anything. Up close the dried blood smelled faintly metallic and old, like a penny held too long in a fist. Saul's tie, Saul's blood. No matter how neatly delivered, it was a nasty thing to see on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe leaned back. "Now," he said, "we respond. By paying more?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said, and his voice was flat with certainty. "By demanding what they fear to provide." Kramer barked. "A demand you think kidnappers negotiate?" Wolfe ignored him. He reached for the phone and dialed a number from memory, one of those private numbers he keeps in his head, like a miser keeps cash. When someone answered, Wolfe said, "This is Nero Wolfe. Your employers have sent me a strip of Mr. Panzer's tie. It is insufficient." A pause. Wolfe listened, expression unmoved. Then he continued, "Before any further discussion of money, I will hear Mr. Panzer's voice. Not a recording, not a word repeated like a parrot. I will speak to him briefly. If you refuse, I will assume he is dead and act accordingly." He hung up. Kramer stared. "Act accordingly? What the hell does that mean?" "It means," I said, "Wolfe just told them he'll stop playing unless they show the hostage." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "I told them I will stop playing unless they demonstrate he can still speak." "You're going to hear Saul," Kramer said, and the hope in his voice was raw enough to hurt. Wolfe didn't answer. Wolfe doesn't encourage hope. He considers it a distraction. The phone rang immediately. Fritz, in the doorway, froze for half a heartbeat, just enough to show he felt the tension too. Then came in and set the receiver on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe picked it up on the first ring, as if he had been waiting with his hand already poised. "Yes," Wolfe said. The voice that came through the receiver was disguised, but not clumsily. This time it had a smooth, confident distortion, like a man who had practiced sounding like nobody at all. "You learn quickly, Wolfe," the voice said. Wolfe's tone stayed mild. "I learned quickly before you were born." A small chuckle. "Still proud." "Still correct," Wolfe replied. "Put Mr. Panzer on." The voice didn't answer at once. It breathed, slowly, calmly, like a man enjoying his position. "You want to hear him because you need him," the voice said. Kramer's hands tightened on the back of a chair. I watched Wolfe's face, waiting for reaction. Wolfe said, "You are indulging yourself. Put him on." Another soft laugh. "Number not yet." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Then you have called to waste my time." "I called to remind you of your place," the voice said. "You are not buying a man. You are buying silence." Wolfe's jaw set. "Silence about what?" "Oh, Wolfe," the voice murmured, and there it was. The taunt polished and intimate, the kind that lands because it's aimed. "You know, that is why the note said no names. That is why you keep telling your witty boy not to speak. That is why you have the inspector in your house like a guilty secret." Kramer jerked as if slapped. "What the—" Wolfe cut him off without looking. "Be silent." The voice went on, warm as poison. "You can solve murders for sport, Wolfe. You can humiliate men for breakfast. But when it comes to this hostage, you don't get to be clever, because you can't admit what he is to you." Wolfe's eyes were very still now. "And what is he to me?" A pause, long enough to make the office feel airless. Then the voice said, "Necessary." It was the same word the man in the rehearsal hall had used in the last case, and hearing it again made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a word, it was a lever. Wolfe's tone stayed controlled. "You are mistaken. If you didn't need him, you'd already have called the police in full daylight and let them trample your orchids. You'd already have shouted his name from the stoop. You haven't because you can't." Wolfe's fingers tightened on the receiver. "Put him on. Soon," the voice said. "First you will listen." Wolfe's voice dropped. "Dangerous. You have 1 minute." The voice sounded pleased. "Good, here is the next instruction. At 2:15 you will receive another call. You will be alone in your office. Not your butler, not your inspector, not your assistant. Alone. If you are not alone, you will receive another strip, something that bleeds more." Kramer surged forward. "You—" Wolfe's gaze snapped to him, and Kramer stopped as if he had hit a wall. The voice continued. "At 2:15, If you are alone, you will hear Mr. Panzer for 30 seconds, and then you will do what you are told, Wolfe said very softly. If I hear a recording, you won't, the voice said. We know you, Wolfe. That's why this works. Wolfe's eyes narrowed further. Then we have an appointment at 2:15. Yes, the voice said, and the confidence in it was infuriating. And Wolfe, don't pretend you're not afraid. You are, not of us, of what you'll have to admit when this is over. The line went dead. For a moment nobody spoke. Even Kramer was quiet, his face rigid with anger and fear. I looked at Wolfe. They want you alone. Wolfe's expression was carved stone. Yes. And they still won't let us hear him, I said, nodding at the blood. Stiff tie strip. Wolfe's eyes flicked to it with distaste. They will, they must. They have promised, and they require my continued participation. Kramer's voice came hoarse. Wolfe, why do they care if his name is spoken? Wolfe did not answer him. Wolfe rarely answers a question that exposes him. Instead, he said, Archie, at 2:15 you will be out of this room. I opened my mouth to protest. Wolfe's eyes held mine. That is an order. I shut my mouth, because Wolfe doesn't often issue orders with that tone, unless the stakes are high or his pride is bleeding, Kramer said. And me. Wolfe's voice was crisp. You will be in the front room with Fritz. If you attempt to eavesdrop, I will personally ensure you regret it. Kramer glared. But he nodded. Wolfe lifted the tie strip with 2 fingers, as if it might stain him by proximity. He studied the dried blood, then the clean-cut edge. They believe, Wolfe said quietly, that my need is my weakness. I said, Is it? Wolfe's eyes lifted. Archie, my needs are none of their concern, which was not an answer. It was a warning. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 2:15, and the brownstone held its breath with it. Chapter 6. The Linden folder at 2:10. I was standing in the hall outside Wolfe's office with my hands in my pockets and my temper in my throat. Kramer was in the front room with Fritz as instructed, which meant he was vibrating with rage in a different location, like a displaced storm. Fritz had placed him on a chair as if seating an unruly child, and Fritz's calm had done what Wolfe's threats alone might not have done. Kept Kramer from bursting in and wrecking the furniture. Wolfe's door was closed. That door is not merely wood, it is a boundary. Inside it Wolfe keeps his mind, his comfort, his schedule, and the illusion that the city's filth can't seep through polished brass. Today the filth was under the door. At 2:14 I heard Wolfe's chair creak faintly. At 2:15 on the dot, the phone rang. I didn't hear Wolfe answer, but I heard the change in the air, the sudden tense stillness that comes when a voice enters a room and it isn't invited. I stood there and listened anyway, because I am Archie Goodwin and disobedience is a habit I keep polished. Wolfe's voice, muffled through the door, was calm. Yes. A pause. Then the other voice, too faint for words. Then another voice, different. It was weak, distant, and it hit me like a fist to the stomach because it didn't belong in that condition. Saul Panzer's voice. I knew Saul's voice the way you know the sound of your own steps. It's quiet, flat, controlled, with a dryness that suggests he has never had time for unnecessary syllables. This voice was controlled only because Saul forced it to be. Wolfe, it said faint, strained, listen. That was all. A sharp click cut him off, clean as scissors through silk. There was a small pause, one of those pauses that isn't silence. It's a deliberate gap left, so you can feel the threat in it. Wolfe's voice came again, and now it was colder. You have proved he can speak. You have not proved he can live, the disguised voice answered, still too muffled for me to catch every word. But the tone carried, amused, confident. Close, that word stuck. The voice sounded as if it were in the same building, perhaps even the same street. That was part of the cruelty. They wanted Wolfe to feel the leash. Wolfe spoke again. You will now state your demand. The voice did. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was one word, clipped and hard enough to hear through the door. Number. I felt my spine tighten. When Wolfe says no like that, It means the demand has touched something he considers untouchable, the voice replied. Soft, insistent, Wolfe said, absolutely not. Another pause. Then Wolfe spoke, and this time his tone was calm, in the way a storm is calm before it moves. If you persist, you will have killed him, not I. The voice said something else. Short, sharp, Wolfe answered. I will not discuss it. And then there was the sound of the receiver being slammed down, not with Wolfe's usual controlled precision, but with something like anger. The door opened. Wolfe stood there, broad and rigid, his face composed, but his eyes bright in a way I didn't like. Wolfe's eyes get bright when he is insulted personally or threatened professionally. This was both. You were listening, he said. Yes, I replied. It's my hobby. He did not indulge that. Come. I followed him into the office and closed the door behind me. The room felt tighter than usual, as if the call had left residue in the air. Wolfe did not sit. That in itself was a statement. Wolfe sits when he is in control. Wolfe stands when he is forced to, he said. You heard Mr. Panzer. I heard enough, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. They cut him off. Wolfe's jaw set. Yes, a warning shot. What did they want? I demanded. You said no, like they asked for your orchids. Wolfe's mouth tightened. He moved to his desk, picked up his pencil, set it down again, as if his hands needed something to do besides strangle someone. Then he said, reluctantly, they want the Linden folder. I blinked. The what? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do not pretend ignorance. You have seen it. I searched my memory. Wolfe's files are legendary. Brown folders, black folders, red tabs, labels in Wolfe's precise hand. There are a few he keeps apart, not in the cabinets, not in the safe, but in a locked drawer of his desk that Fritz dusts around as if it were holy. The Linden folder, I repeated slowly. The one you never open when I'm in the room. Wolfe's eyes held mine. Yes. I exhaled. So the ransom isn't for money at all. No, Wolfe said. The money is theater. The true demand is leverage. To force you to hand over whatever's in that folder, I said. Wolfe nodded once. And you refused, I said, which means whatever's in it matters enough to risk Saul's life. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Do not phrase it that way. Why not? I snapped. That's exactly what it is. Wolfe's gaze cut into me, cold, offended. Archie, you presume to judge my priorities. Be careful. I held his gaze. Boss, I'm not judging. I'm trying to understand. Because if I understand, I can help. If I don't, I'm just carrying envelopes and getting knives waved at me. Wolfe stared at me for a long beat. Then, very slowly, he sat down. The creak of the chair sounded like a concession. The Linden folder, Wolfe said, contains information that must not be released. To the kidnappers, I said. To anyone, Wolfe corrected. It is. He stopped, and for a moment his pride fought his sense. Then sense won, because Saul's voice had been too thin to ignore. It concerns a client, Wolfe said, whom I have protected. I leaned forward. Protected from what? Wolfe's lips pressed together. From consequences. That's vague, I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. It is sufficient. It isn't for me, I said. Who's the client? Wolfe hesitated. That hesitation was the most honest thing I'd seen from him all day. Finally, he said, a man named Linden. Well, that's convenient, I said. And he's tied to 35th Street trouble. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Yes. I felt the pieces begin to shift. 35th Street wasn't just our address. 35th Street was a locus, a line in their script. They had staged the dock behind our street. They had made me walk our blocks like a trained dog. They wanted Wolfe to feel that his fortress was surrounded. I said, what did Linden do? Wolfe's jaw tightened. Years ago, he was involved in a matter, an ugly matter. In this neighborhood, it resulted in violence. It resulted in a death. A death you kept quiet, I asked. Wolfe's voice was cold. A death the police failed to address competently. Kramer would have exploded if he'd heard that. and part of me wished he had. But the important part was this. Wolfe had a file that protected a client, and someone now wanted it badly enough to kidnap Saul to get it. So they're using Saul as leverage, I said carefully, to force you to expose someone you've been shielding. Wolfe's eyes held mine. Yes, and you can't give it to them, I said. Wolfe's face hardened. Number. I looked at the tie strip on the blotter, then at Wolfe, then at the phone. My mind ran through possibilities like a rat in a maze. If the Linden folder held information about a death on 35th Street, then whoever was behind this either feared it or wanted it weaponized. Why now? I asked. Why drag this out of whatever hole it's been sleeping in? Wolfe's mouth tightened. Because the man who fears exposure believes he can control the terms by forcing my hand, and because Saul is the one man you can't ignore, I said. Before I could stop myself, Wolfe's eyes flashed. Archie. Sorry, I muttered. But that's what the voice said. Necessary. Wolfe leaned back slightly, as if to put distance between himself and the insult. They are correct, he said quietly. In one respect, I require Mr. Panzer's services. I do not require their permission to have them. It wasn't quite an admission of affection, but for Wolfe it was close enough to draw blood. The phone rang again, startling me. Wolfe didn't pick it up at once. He stared at it, then at me. This, he said, is the real demand. He lifted the receiver. Yes. The disguised voice came through, no longer amused. You have 1 hour, it said. Bring the Linden folder to the old freight elevator at Dock Street, 315, alone. If you refuse, you will hear him again briefly. Wolfe's voice was ice. And if I comply, you will get him back, the voice said. Alive, if he remains useful. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You have moved from extortion to blackmail. The voice chuckled softly. Call it whatever makes you feel proud. We call it business. The line went dead. Wolfe held the receiver for a moment, then set it down carefully, as if restraint were the only thing keeping him from crushing it. He looked at me. Dock Street again. I nodded slowly. Dock Street, I said. A good place for ugly dealings. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. They are returning us to the origin. The folder, I said. The death, 35th Street trouble, Dock Street delivery. Wolfe's voice was calm, but the calm was sharpened now. Archie, we will not give them the Linden folder. Then what do we give them? I asked. Wolfe's eyes held mine, and there was something fierce in them, a pride that had been prodded into action. We give them, Wolfe said, what they have earned. I swallowed. And what's that? Wolfe's mouth tightened into the faintest shadow of a smile. A trap, he said. Chapter 7. The trap in the paper. Wolfe's idea of urgency is to sit down and make you run faster. He had said, a trap, with the faintest hint of satisfaction, and then he rang for Fritz as if arranging a luncheon. Fritz arrived, calm as ever, and Wolfe told him to bring coffee and the key to the desk drawer. Wolfe never opened in my presence. That alone told me the Linden folder wasn't a legend. It was a loaded gun kept polished. When Fritz produced the key, Wolfe did not immediately unlock the drawer. He looked at me first. Archie, he said, you will control your curiosity. I'll try, I said. But if it starts barking, I can't promise it won't bite. Wolfe ignored that and unlocked the drawer. He removed a plain manila folder. No red tab, no label on the spine, nothing to announce itself. It looked like every other folder in the world, which was exactly the point. He opened it and slid the contents out onto the blotter with deliberate care. There were typed pages, carbon copies, and a few photographs. Grainy shots of a building front, a close-up of a signature, and one picture of a man leaving a doorway with his collar up. There were also receipts, repair invoices, rent ledgers, and a deed transfer photocopy that made my eyebrows lift. Wolfe watched me. Now you understand why I refused to discuss it. I understand why someone wants it, I said. This isn't just a scandal, it's a pipeline. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Proceed. That meant read, extract, summarize, and do it fast. I did. The Linden folder wasn't about a single ugly incident. It was about a long, quiet scheme that used 35th Street, the way a pickpocket uses a crowd. A developer. Linden, the client Wolfe had shielded, had been entangled with a real estate fraud trail running along the block. Fake repair contracts, forged tenant signatures, phony eviction notices, and a pattern of ownership transfers through shell companies that changed names like men change hats. The fraud wasn't glamorous, it was practical. It bled buildings slowly, turning them into money without making noise. And the folder had what criminals hate: a timeline, a name list, and a witness who had once talked. I tapped one page. Here, this is the hinge. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, just enough to show interest. Explain. A witness statement, I said. Old, but detailed. It ties Linden's shell company to a fake repair contractor and to forged signatures. It also names the man who handled the intimidation. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Name him. I checked the page and felt a small chill. Ray Dunlap. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. I expected that. That's comforting, I said. Because I didn't. The name stood out because it had the smell of a man who had survived his own past by changing his clothes and his habits. The folder included a note in Wolfe's handwriting, dated years ago, stating that Dunlap had been a witness in a property fraud hearing and had later recanted. The margin note was short and emphatic: recantation purchased. I looked up. You kept this because... What? Because Linden hired you to keep him clean. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Because Linden came to me with remorse and terror. He wished to withdraw from the scheme and feared retaliation. So you protected him, I said. I protected. Wolfe corrected. What was useful? I snorted. That's Wolfe compassion. Wolfe's gaze flicked to the clock. We do not have time for your morals. Find Mr. Dunlap. I didn't ask how. I did what I always do. I used the city's paper trail. A man who is living clean and scared, pays rent on time, avoids attention, and changes addresses just often enough to feel safe. He also leaves fingerprints everywhere: utility bills, phone listings, a driver's license renewal, a church donation receipt if he's feeling guilty. By 3 o'clock I had him. Ray Dunlap, formerly of trouble, currently of a modest apartment on the west side under a softened version of his name. He worked days for a maintenance company. Irony has a sense of humor. And he attended a neighborhood church twice a week, the kind of habit men adopt when they want to be seen in wholesome light. I brought the information to Wolfe. He read it and nodded once. He is frightened, Wolfe said. Therefore he is valuable. Or dead, I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Not yet. They require him as a lever. The lever must exist. He slid the Linden folder back into its jacket and set it aside as if it were a piece of spoiled meat. Then he reached into a cabinet and pulled out an empty manila folder, identical in every harmless detail. We will give them the folder, Wolfe said. I stared. You just said we won't. We will not give them the folder, Wolfe corrected. We will give them a folder. He gestured to the desk. Construct it. It was a Wolfe instruction, simple, absolute, and irritating. I took copies of the least damaging pages, enough to look convincing, enough to tempt a buyer, not enough to destroy the man Wolfe had been shielding. Wolfe added one page himself, typed fresh, summarizing the Linden matter, with just enough specificity to make a criminal drool. Then Saul's replacement in this case, Wolfe's own ingenuity, appeared in the form of a thin, innocuous strip Wolfe produced from a small box. A tracer, Wolfe said. It was no bigger than a matchbook insert adhesive, backed, designed to ride in paper without being noticed. Wolfe wasn't a man of gadgets, but he was a man of results, and he had learned long ago that modern crime sometimes requires modern crumbs. He pressed the tracer into the spine of the decoy folder, sealed it, and set it down. Now, Wolfe said, we will learn who is truly buying secrets. Kramer arrived at 3:20, furious on principle and out of breath from ignoring his own instincts. He took one look at the decoy folder and growled, "You're actually going to deliver it?" "We are going," Wolfe said, "to watch it be taken." Kramer's face went crimson. "That's not watching. That's letting them." "That is chess," Wolfe said calmly. "You play checkers." Kramer's jaw tightened, but he had been forced into discipline by fear and by Wolfe's certainty. "I'll give you a perimeter," he snapped. Plainclothes quiet, but if anything happens, Wolfe lifted a finger. "Inspector, if anything happens, it will happen because you were loud." Kramer looked like he wanted to throw Wolfe through his own front window. Instead, he swallowed and nodded once. The way a man nods when he hates the truth but needs it. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips together, and the faintest edge of satisfaction touched his mouth. "The paper," he said softly, "is the trap. They believe they are buying my obedience. In fact, they are selling me their identity." I looked at the decoy folder on the blotter and felt the clock tick again. This time toward Dock Street, toward Saul's cut-off voice, toward whatever waited at the old freight elevator. And I realized the kidnappers had made one mistake. They had treated Nero Wolfe like a vending machine. You put in a threat, you get out compliance. They were about to learn Wolfe didn't dispense obedience. He dispensed consequences. Chapter 8. Midnight on 35th. Midnight changes 35th Street. The way gin changes a conversation. Everything gets softer around the edges, and the things you shouldn't do start sounding reasonable. Wolfe, of course, was not under the elevated tracks at midnight. Wolfe was in his office, presumably glaring at the clock and resenting the city for having a night at all. I was the one standing in slush and shadow with a plain manila folder under my arm, waiting to be purchased like a used car. The elevated tracks weren't romantic. They were steel ribs above a narrow stretch of pavement that the city treated like an afterthought. The trains were gone for the moment, but the structure held onto the day's vibration, an occasional faint tremor as if it remembered noise and missed it. A wind blew along the street like it had a schedule. Kramer's perimeter was there, but you had to believe in it. Plainclothes men were tucked into doorways, behind parked cars, in the mouth of an alley, doing their best impression of casual. If I didn't know they were mine, I'd have assumed they were thieves on a coffee break. Wolfe's tracer was in the folder. I could feel its weight without touching it, an imaginary ounce of hope. At 12:01 a.m., a figure detached from the shadow of a support column and walked toward me. He was medium height, medium build, medium everything. The kind of man you can't describe to a policeman the next day because your brain refuses to waste storage. He wore a dark knit cap and a jacket that had seen better winters. His face was pale in the sodium light, and his eyes were alert, but not clever. He looked like hired motion. "You're Goodwin," he said. "I was this morning," I replied. "But the city keeps trying to change me." He didn't smile. "Folder. Where's Saul?" I asked. The man's jaw tightened. "You'll get him." "That's what you people always say," I said. "And then you always act surprised when I want proof." He took a step closer. "Give it." There was a confidence in that word, but not the same smooth confidence as the disguised voice on the phone. This was a man who expected the world to obey because someone told him it would. That made him dangerous in a simple way. I held the folder out, but I didn't release it. "Name," I said. His eyes narrowed. "You've got a name," I said. "Everybody does. I'd like to know yours before I donate paperwork to the shadows." His mouth curled faintly. Not amusement, irritation. Cal Vinson. The name landed with the dullness of a brick, not a mastermind, not even a poet, just Cal Vinson, a man doing a job. "All right, Cal," I said. "Here's the folder." I let go. He snatched it like a man afraid it might evaporate. He didn't open it at once. He stepped back 2 paces and did a quick, practiced look around, the way a man does when he's been told not to be caught. Then he opened it. His eyes moved fast. Over the first page, then the second. His face didn't change much, but his breathing did. One small hitch. He flipped again, faster now, his fingers suddenly clumsy. "No," he muttered. I kept my voice light. No, that's a strong reaction for a man receiving free literature. His head snapped up. This is wrong. That's interesting, I said, because it's filed so neatly. He shoved the folder back into its jacket as if it had bitten him. His hand went to his pocket. I took a small step back, not because I'm timid, but because I respect physics. Cal Vinson didn't draw a gun. He drew a phone. He glanced at the screen, thumbed fast, and then his eyes widened. Real panic now, the kind that sweats through winter clothing. He looked up at me as if seeing me properly for the first time. You set me up. That's a nasty word, I said. I prefer invited. He turned and ran. He ran hard, not the measured walk of a man doing a drop, but the blind sprint of a man who has suddenly discovered he is the bait. And he ran straight into the quiet police lines. A plainclothes man stepped out of a doorway and reached for him. Cal swerved, slammed into the side of a parked car, bounced off, and kept going. Another man appeared. A third. It was almost graceful, like watching a net close. Then Cal made his second mistake. He threw the phone, not at anyone, just away, as if discarding it could discard his guilt. It skittered across the wet pavement and slid to a stop near my shoe. I scooped it up, without thinking. Reflex is a wonderful thing when it's on your side. Cal Vinson didn't get far. Kramer himself, unable to resist the satisfaction of involvement, came barreling out of the darkness like a bull with a badge. He grabbed Cal by the collar and drove him into the nearest wall with an enthusiasm that suggested he had been saving up frustration all day. Where is Panzer? Kramer roared. Cal's face was white. I don't know, I swear. Don't know, Kramer shouted. You don't know the man you kidnapped. I didn't kidnap him, Cal screamed. I just... Kramer shook him once. Hard. You just what? Cal's eyes darted wildly, searching for a lie that would live. None offered to volunteer. I walked over, holding the phone up like a trophy. Inspector, I said, before you strangle him into poetry, you might want this. Kramer's head snapped to me. His grip loosened a fraction. What is it? His phone, I said. And it's chatty. Kramer glared at Cal. You idiot. I thumbed the screen. It wasn't locked. Cal Vinson didn't seem like a man who planned ahead. Messages were open, recent, and ugly in their simplicity. Most of them were from an unknown number, short instructions, times, places, threats. And then a name appeared on the thread like a nail in a shoe, Dunlap. I felt the case snap into focus, the way a camera lens snaps when you finally stop being stubborn. Wolfe's silence wasn't about pride alone. It was about protecting what was in the Linden folder. Protecting Linden, protecting the fraud trail, protecting the witness who had once talked and lived to regret it. Ray Dunlap hadn't just stood out in the file. Ray Dunlap was the hinge the kidnappers were swinging on. I looked at the screen again, at one message sent an hour earlier. Dunlap says, Wolfe will fold. If he talks, cut Panzer. I swallowed. So that was it, clean and cruel. Saul Panzer was the hostage, but Wolfe's silence was the target. They weren't trying to get rich. They were trying to make Wolfe betray the shield he'd kept in place for years, and they had chosen the one man whose absence could make Wolfe blink. Kramer barked. What does it say? I showed him the name. Dunlap, I said. Your kidnapper's answer to Ray Dunlap. Kramer stared, then spat. Never heard of him. You have, I said. You just didn't know it. He's in Wolfe's folder. He's the witness. He's the lever. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Then where's Saul? I looked at Cal Vinson, trembling, cornered, suddenly very small. Cal, I said pleasantly, you're going to tell us how to find Dunlap. And if you can't, you're going to tell us who can. Cal's mouth worked. I don't. Kramer slammed him back into the wall. Try again. Cal's eyes flicked to the folder lying on the ground, then to the plainclothes men, then to the phone in my hand, and whatever courage he'd borrowed for the night came due with interest. He whispered, he meets. Under the tracks, not here. Further west, old stairwell. He calls it the Linden Step. I felt a cold grin try to form and stopped it. There was nothing funny about this. Not with Saul's voice cut off mid, words still ringing in my head. But there was something satisfying in one fact. They had wanted Wolfe's obedience. Instead, we had their trail. And for the first time since dawn under the door, the clock didn't feel like it belonged to them. Chapter 9, where Saul is kept. The tracer didn't blink like a conscience. It blinked like a metronome, back in Wolfe's office, with Kramer still breathing hard and trying to look as if he hadn't just used a wall to question a man. I laid Cal Vinson's phone on the blotter beside the decoy folder and opened the tracer app. The little dot that marked Wolfe's paper bait was moving again. Slow, steady, confident, like a man walking a dog that couldn't bite. Wolfe's eyes narrowed at the screen. They have taken it. Or Cal did before he ran, I said. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Mr. Vinson is not clever enough to decide what to do with it. He is clever enough to carry it. Kramer growled. Ina, where is Saul? Here, I said, and turned the phone so Wolfe could see it. Wolfe looked at the location and did something rare. He didn't comment on it. His face went hard, his eyes bright, and the only movement he made was a small nod, as if he were marking a square on a chessboard. He already understood. A shuttered office building, he said. Kramer leaned over the screen. That's 2 blocks from here. Yes, Wolfe said. They wish to demonstrate proximity. It is part of the intimidation, I said. Part of the theater. Wolfe's gaze cut into me. Now we end the performance. Kramer snapped. We go in. Now. Wolfe lifted a finger. Inspector, quietly. Kramer's nostrils flared. Quietly? Sure, quietly. I'll whisper my way through a rescue. You will not go first, Wolfe said. Kramer stared. What? Wolfe's voice was crisp. If you go first, you will make noise. If you make noise, Mr. Panzer will suffer. Therefore you will comply with a simple instruction. You will let men who are trained for silence do the opening. Kramer looked ready to argue, then remembered Saul's voice. Weak, cut off, and swallowed his pride like medicine. Fine, he snarled. Fine. It was a narrow, mean little structure wedged between 2 businesses that had given up on life months ago. Painted, over windows, a locked glass door. A lobby you could see only in fragments through grime. Above it, a sign hung crooked with no letters left. It was anonymous, which is what criminals love. Kramer had 3 plainclothes men with him, and 1 uniformed patrol car parked far enough away to pretend it wasn't involved. I had the tracer. Kramer had a key ring full of authority. None of it mattered as much as one man's lungs. A plainclothes cop, thin, calm, competent, produced a set of picks and went to work on the door like a man playing a quiet instrument. The lock surrendered with a small click that sounded too polite for what we were doing. We slipped inside. The lobby smelled of dust and old steam pipes. The lighting was minimal. 1 emergency bulb, yellow and weak, buzzing like an annoyed insect. Our footsteps sounded loud, so we stopped making them loud. The tracer. Pointed upward. 3rd floor. Kramer mouthed words without sound. 3rd. I nodded. We took the stairs. The stairwell was concrete and cold, with flaking paint and a handrail that didn't deserve to be touched. On the 2nd landing we heard something, faint, rhythmic, breathing, not calm, breathing, controlled breathing. Saul. Kramer tensed like a dog catching scent. I put a hand out, and for once he didn't shrug it off. We moved again, slower. On the 3rd floor the hallway was dark, except for a thin wedge of light under 1 door. The tracer. Was directly behind it, as precise as an accusation. The cop with the picks worked again. The door opened an inch. Kramer shoved forward. The cop caught his sleeve, and Kramer froze, eyes burning. But he didn't push. He had learned, painfully, that silence was not cowardice. The door swung open, a small office, bare walls, a desk with drawers pulled out and emptied, like someone had searched for something in a hurry. A folding chair near the radiator. On the floor, A man sitting with his back against the wall, wrists bound with tape. Ankles, too. His face was bruised, his lips split, his tie gone. Saul Panzer looked up at us with eyes as flat as ever. "About time," he said hoarsely. Kramer surged in. "Saul." Saul's gaze flicked to him. "Inspector, you're loud." Kramer actually choked. Then his face twisted, and he dropped to one knee beside Saul, fumbling with the tape like a man trying to undo his own guilt. "Hold still," Kramer muttered. "Hold still." Saul's mouth tightened. "I've been holding still for 12 hours. I crouched on Saul's other side. "You look great," I told him. "Very seasonal. The bruises bring out your eyes." Saul's gaze slid to me. "You spilled the money." "Rumor," I said. "Also fact." One of the cops cut the tape cleanly. Saul flexed his wrists once, slow, as if testing whether his body still belonged to him. He stood with a slight hitch, but his posture settled immediately into that controlled balance that makes him look like he's already decided the outcome. Kramer's voice came rough. "Who did it, Vincent?" Saul shook his head once. Vincent was hands, and the voice. I asked. Saul's eyes hardened. Not Vincent. Wolfe wasn't there, but his shadow was. Saul looked past us, as if seeing Wolfe's office in his mind, and then he said the name without hesitation. "Because Saul doesn't treat names like explosives." "Dunlap," Saul said. "Ray Dunlap." Kramer blinked. "Who the hell is?" Saul cut him off. "Money behind it. Motive behind it. He's scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. Though I already knew, Saul's mouth tightened. "The Linden Truth, the folder. He thinks if Wolfe talks, he's finished." Kramer stared. "So you grab a private detective to keep a file buried?" Saul's eyes were cold. "Dunlap doesn't think like you. He thinks like a man who once got away with something and believes the only way to stay free is to control the story." I felt my stomach tighten. They were trying to make Wolfe hand over the folder. Saul nodded once. And if Wolfe wouldn't, they'd make him admit what he protects. "Who he protects," Kramer said, harsh. "Where is Dunlap?" Saul's gaze flicked toward the empty desk. "He wasn't here. He doesn't show up in person. Too scared. Too careful." "Vincent brought food. Another guy brought the phone. Dunlap sent instructions." "And he kept you close," I said, looking around. "Close enough to 35th to make Wolfe feel it." Saul's eyes narrowed. "Yes." Kramer clenched his fists. "We arrest him." Saul's voice stayed flat. "You can try." I looked at Saul. "What else did you hear?" Saul paused, and that pause told me he was choosing which facts to drop first. Because Saul always chooses. "They argued," he said, "about whether to hurt me more. Vincent didn't want to. Another man did. And Dunlap kept saying the same thing." "What?" I asked. Saul's eyes went colder. "That Wolfe won't admit he needs me. That if Wolfe admits it, he loses. Dunlap thinks pride runs Wolfe." I swallowed. "Dunlap doesn't know Wolfe." Saul's mouth tightened. "Number," Kramer barked. "Then how do we get him?" Saul looked at me. "Wolfe will." That was Saul's faith, and it sounded like certainty. We got Saul down the stairs and out into the winter air. He moved stiffly, but he moved. Alive. That word finally had meaning again. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, seated now, composed, as if rescue operations were merely inconvenient errands conducted by noisier men. Fritz hovered at the door like a guardian of civilization. Saul walked in, bruised and angry, and Wolfe's eyes fixed on him with something that was not quite relief, and not quite irritation, but unmistakably personal. "You are late," Wolfe said. Saul's mouth twitched faintly. "Traffic," Wolfe grunted, a sound that, in his language, meant welcome home. Then he said, "Mr. Dunlap." Saul nodded. "Yes." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "As I suspected." Kramer exploded. "Then we get him." Wolfe looked at him with cool disdain. "Inspector, we have already retrieved what matters most." He gestured slightly towards Saul. Rescue first. Then Wolfe's gaze sharpened, and the air in the room tightened the way it does when Wolfe is about to turn the world into an orderly diagram. Reckoning, Wolfe said softly. Second, and I knew, because I had seen that look before, that the final office gathering was already forming in Wolfe's mind, with every chair filled and every lie pinned in place, and Ray Dunlap walking in believing he still owned the story. Chapter 10. Wolfe's quiet admission if you want to watch. Nero Wolfe do his best work. Don't look at the moment he springs the trap. Look at the hours before it, when he sits in his chair, as if it were a throne, and rearranges the universe without lifting anything heavier than a finger. Saul Panzer sat in the yellow chair across from Wolfe's desk, a little stiff, a little bruised and perfectly furious. Saul's fury is quiet. It doesn't splash, it congeals. Fritz had brought him broth and something that pretended to be food, but was really medicine. Saul drank it without comment because he knows Fritz's cooking is not an opportunity for debate. Kramer had wanted Saul at a hospital. Saul had said no, Wolfe had nodded once, and that had ended that discussion. Wolfe is not a physician, but he has an almost medical confidence in his own priorities. I was on the red chair, watching the pieces line up. The ransom theater was over, the real play was beginning. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips together. Mr. Dunlap, he said. Saul's eyes narrowed. He's scared. Good, Wolfe replied. Fear is a leash, we shall attach it. Kramer was standing near the door as if guarding it personally from common sense. He had his hat in his hand, and his jaw was working. Kramer was itching to do what he thinks policing is, go out, kick down a door, and drag the truth out by the collar. Wolfe looked at him and said, Inspector, you will remain. Kramer blinked. Here. Yes, Wolfe said. You will observe. You will arrest. You will, if possible, refrain from speech. Kramer's face reddened. Wolfe. Wolfe lifted a finger. Kramer shut up. It was like watching a dog sit because the master has raised a newspaper. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will telephone Mr. Dunlap. I stared. You want me to call the man who financed a kidnapping and tell him to drop by for tea? Yes, Wolfe said. Bold. I said, accurate, Wolfe corrected. You will tell him that I have reconsidered. You will tell him I am prepared to negotiate. Saul's eyes flicked to Wolfe. He won't come. Wolfe's mouth tightened. He will. He believes I am bound by pride. He will come to enjoy my humiliation. That was Wolfe at his coldest and most perceptive. He understood not just what a man wanted, but what a man wanted to watch. I called the number we had pulled off Cal Vinson's phone. The unknown number that had been giving orders like a conductor. It rang twice. A voice answered, and it was not disguised this time. It was careful, flat, and sharp. The voice of a man trying to sound ordinary because he thinks ordinary is armor. Yes, this is Archie Goodwin, I said cheerfully. Mr. Wolfe would like to speak with you. A pause. About what? About the Linden folder, I said, and heard the smallest hitch of breath. Fear, there it was, alive on the wire. He refused, the voice said. He did, I agreed. He's changed his mind. He'd like to negotiate the terms in person. Silence, then. Why would he do that? Because, I said, you used very expensive leverage, and Mr. Wolfe is a practical man. Wolfe's eyes narrowed at me, but he didn't interrupt. He wanted this call to sound credible, which meant he wanted me to be just dishonest enough. The voice said, Lo, you have Panzer. I glanced at Saul, who sat like a silent judge. Yes, I said, we do. Another pause. Then the voice, brittle, then I don't need Wolfe. Oh, I said, you do, because you're still scared, and the only way to stop being scared is to know what Wolfe knows and what he has. The line was quiet. I could almost see Dunlap weighing it. I could almost see his fear tugging him toward the thing he should avoid. What time? He asked. I smiled, because that was the moment Wolfe always wins. The moment the mouse asks where the cheese will be served. Now, I said. Mr. Wolfe is at home. He prefers promptness. Another breath. I come alone. You may, I said, and you should, because if you bring company, Inspector Kramer will become emotional. Behind me, Kramer made a sound, like a kettle beginning to boil. The voice said, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Wolfe nodded once. I hung up. Saul said quietly, He's coming. Wolfe's eyes stayed half-lidded, naturally. Boss, I said, we're inviting a kidnapper into your office. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, do you understand that I have done precisely this before? Yes, I said. But it's usually somebody who didn't steal Saul. Wolfe's gaze flicked. Sharp. Do not be sentimental. Saul's mouth twitched faintly. He isn't. Wolfe grunted and rang for Fritz. Fritz appeared. Yes, sir. Coffee, Wolfe said, and remove the beer from Mr. Goodwin's reach. He may become dramatic. Fritz's eyes slid to me. Yes, sir, Kramer muttered. This is insane. Wolfe ignored him, because Wolfe considers sanity to be a matter of results. We arranged the room the way Wolfe liked. Chairs in their proper places, desk clear, the decoy folder out of sight, the real Linden folder locked away again where it belonged. The evidence we needed sat in Wolfe's mind, and in a few items on the side table, Cal Vinson's phone printed screenshots of the messages to Dunlap, and Vinson himself in the front room under guard, Alive, shaken, and ready to sing because fear had finally picked a side. At 28 minutes, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered. The sound of a man's steps followed, confident at first, then slowing as he entered the house, and felt what everyone feels in Wolfe's brownstone, that this place has rules older than your excuses. Ray Dunlap came into the office without removing his coat. That alone told me he was afraid. A man who expects to negotiate takes his time. A man who expects to run keeps his coat on. He was in his late 40s, neatly dressed, the kind of neat that tries too hard. Clean haircut, clean nails, clean face. The only thing not clean was his eyes, which were sharp with the strain of pretending he wasn't hunted. He stopped when he saw Kramer. His mouth tightened. This is a mistake. Wolfe's voice was mild. Not at all, Mr. Dunlap. It is an economy. The inspector saves me a telephone call. Dunlap's gaze flicked to Saul. It held there for a fraction too long, then slid away. Relief, quickly suppressed. Saul was alive. The leverage had failed. The world had not ended yet. Dunlap looked back to Wolfe. I was told you wanted to negotiate. I do, Wolfe said. Sit down. Dunlap hesitated, then took the chair facing Wolfe's desk. The yellow chair Saul had vacated. It was a pleasing symmetry, and Wolfe is fond of symmetry. Wolfe regarded him. You have been frightened, Wolfe said. Dunlap's jaw tightened. Number Wolfe nodded slightly. That is untrue. The Linden matter has resurfaced in your mind, and you have reacted with crude improvisation. Dunlap's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you mean. Wolfe sighed faintly. Mr. Dunlap. You are now in my office. Lying here is more offensive than elsewhere. Dunlap leaned forward slightly. You have something that belongs to me. No, Wolfe said. I have something that belongs to the truth. You wish to purchase it. You attempted to purchase it with violence. Dunlap's gaze flicked to Kramer again. I didn't. Wolfe lifted a hand. Before we proceed, Inspector, bring Mr. Vinson in. Kramer's face brightened with the prospect of action. He went to the door, barked once, and two plainclothes men escorted Cal Vinson into the office. Vinson looked worse in good light. Pale, damp, trying to make himself small. His eyes went to Dunlap, and you could see the resentment flare, the hired man seeing the man who hired him. Dunlap's face changed. The clean mask cracked a little. What is this? Dunlap demanded. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. It is proof. Vinson swallowed hard. You said Wolfe would fold, he blurted, the words tumbling out because fear had unscrewed his restraint. You said Panzer was the key. You said if Wolfe heard him, Wolfe would give up the folder. Dunlap's eyes went cold. Shut up. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Mr. Vincent will not shut up. He is now motivated by self-preservation, which is a reliable motive. Dunlap stood up abruptly. This is a trap. Wolfe looked mildly pleased. Yes. Dunlap's gaze swept the room. Saul Kramer, the cops, me, Fritz in the doorway like a civilized statue. Dunlap's shoulders tightened. He had come expecting negotiation. He had walked into a courtroom. He tried to recover. If you want money, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You are tiresome. Wolfe nodded to me. I slid the printed screenshots across the desk toward Dunlap. Dunlap glanced at them, and his face went subtly grey. The messages were plain, ugly, and fatal. Dunlap says Wolfe will fold. If he talks, cut Panzer. Move the folder under tracks, no names. Dunlap's mouth tightened. Anion could have written that. Wolfe's voice was dry. Yes, but not anyone would have your number, your fear, and your motive. Dunlap's eyes flashed. I have no motive. Wolfe leaned back. Mr. Dunlap, do not insult me. The Linden folder contains documentation of a fraud scheme on 35th Street in which you participated. It contains evidence of intimidation and forgery. It contains, most importantly, your name attached to a witness statement you attempted to purchase into silence. Dunlap's jaw clenched. Old history, old Wolfe agreed. But not dead. And that is what frightened you. You feared that your old conduct would become public, and you feared that the consequences would include prison. Dunlap's voice rose slightly. I'm not going to prison because of a folder. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Then why did you fund a kidnapping? The words landed in the room like a dropped hammer. Dunlap froze. Kramer leaned forward, eyes bright. Saul's face remained flat, but I saw the tightness at his jaw. Dunlap's mouth worked. He tried, for a heartbeat, to pretend he hadn't heard. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Answer. Dunlap's gaze flicked to Vincent, then to Saul, then to me. He was cornered by evidence, by a witness, by his own fear. The room was too tight. The truth had nowhere to go except out. I didn't kidnap him, Dunlap snapped, and then immediately realized he'd chosen the wrong denial. Kramer pounced on it. Didn't so you admit there was a kidnapping? Dunlap's face went rigid. Wolfe's voice cut in, precise. Mr. Dunlap funded it. He did not execute it. That is his distinction, and he is proud of it. Dunlap's eyes flared. I was trying to protect myself. There, Wolfe said softly. We are closer. Dunlap's voice cracked, and the clean mask fell away. You don't understand. Linden was going to ruin me. You were going to ruin me. That file, those papers, people don't forgive. They bury you. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So you buried Mr. Panzer instead. Dunlap's shoulders hunched. I didn't hurt him. Saul's voice was flat, hoarse. You paid men who did. Dunlap flinched at Saul's voice, perhaps because he had heard it cut off on a phone line and had mistaken that control for weakness. Dunlap's words came faster now, spilling. I told them to keep him alive. I told them I just needed Wolfe to hand it over. Just the folder. I didn't want blood. Wolfe's voice was cold. And yet you sent blood, a strip of his tie. Dunlap swallowed hard. That wasn't my idea. That was. Vincent, Wolfe prompted mildly. Vincent shook his head fast. Not me, the other guy, the one with the voice. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You employed more than one intermediary, Mr. Dunlap. Dunlap's mouth tightened. He had no choice now but to complete the fall. I hired them, he said, almost whispering. I paid, yes, I funded it. The instant the words landed, Kramer moved. He stepped forward, snapped cuffs on Dunlap's wrists with the satisfaction of a man, slamming punctuation onto a lie, and said, That's enough. You're under arrest. Dunlap jerked. Too late. No, wait. Kramer grinned without humor. Oh, we'll wait. In a nice room with bars. Dunlap's eyes went wild. He looked at Wolfe. You said negotiate. Wolfe's voice was mild. We did. You negotiated yourself into a confession. Kramer hauled Dunlap toward the door. The plainclothes men took Vincent as well, because witnesses are always safer when locked somewhere the other side can't reach. The office emptied quickly. Noise, footsteps, the jingle of cuffs, Fritz's polite. This way, please, as if escorting guests out after an unpleasant dinner. Then, it was just us again. Wolfe behind his desk, Saul standing near the chair, me in my usual spot, and the brownstone settling back into itself like a cat after a disturbance. Wolfe looked at Saul. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were not. They held something tight and private. Saul said, "Dunlap will talk," Wolfe grunted. "Yes." Saul's mouth tightened. "He'll try to blame you." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "He will fail." Saul stood still, then said quietly, "You didn't give them the folder." "No," Wolfe said. Saul's gaze held Wolfe's. "You could have." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "I do not yield to extortion." Saul's mouth twitched faintly, even when it costs. Wolfe's eyes hardened, especially then. For a moment it looked as if Saul might say something else, something that would force Wolfe to answer in human terms instead of legal ones. He didn't. Saul is not sentimental either. He simply nodded once and turned toward the door. Wolfe stopped him with 2 words. "Return tomorrow." Saul paused. He looked back. Wolfe's face was composed again, but the instruction hung in the air, like an admission Wolfe could not say aloud. Not "thank you," not "I needed you," not "I was afraid." Just the simple assumption of continuity that Saul belonged in the pattern of Wolfe's life, and that the pattern would resume. Saul's eyes softened by a fraction, so small you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. "Tomorrow," Saul said. He left. I sat back and let out a breath I'd been holding since dawn under the door. "Well," I said, "that was festive." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not be frivolous." "I'm not," I said. "I'm coping." Wolfe picked up his pencil, rolled it once, then set it down with that same precise care he used when the world was behaving properly. "The matter is concluded," Wolfe said. "Except for the part where Saul got kidnapped and bruised," I said. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me. "Mr. Panzer is not fragile." "He's not," I agreed. "But you are." Wolfe's eyes went cold. "Archie." I held up a hand, I know. No sentiment, no names, no speeches. "But you told him to return tomorrow." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Yes, why?" I asked. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half. Lidded again, his fortress restored. "Because," he said, "there will be work." "That's the official reason," I said. Wolfe's gaze held mine for a long beat. "Go to bed," Wolfe said, which, in Wolfe's language, was the closest thing to a confession he was willing to make. I went, and as I climbed the stairs, the brownstone felt normal again, warm, orderly, secure, but the memory of that neat ransom note under the door stayed with me, like a thin piece of paper that had managed, for one day, to push Nero Wolfe out of his chair and make him show, without ever saying it, that even an armchair detective has 1 or 2 people he cannot afford to lose.